Okay, I think we can get started. I'll pass it over to Nina.
Thank you, Tobias. Tansi, welcome to the J Series inaugural talk, Revisiting and Reconnecting Indigenous Language and Culture. My name is Nina Polovikova. I use pronouns she and they, and I am an associate professor of history in Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences at Athabasca University. I will be facilitating the J Series inaugural talk, organized by a team of AU scholars, Dr. Susan McCullough, Assistant Professor of Philosophy, Dr. Tobias Wiggins, Assistant Professor of Women and Gender Studies, and our wonderful research assistant, Priscilla McGreer, Cultural Studies students in the MACE program at Athabasca University. Before we launch the official opening of J Series talk, I would like to acknowledge the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences for supporting this series, which aims to increase capacities for justice in research, teaching and service within FHSS and beyond. We hope that this project will foster networks of social justice scholars, students and community activists to increase knowledge and capacity of participants to engage in and converse about justice issues. I'd like to draw your attention to a conference, Kikapekiskwewin, on Indigenous research, ethics, and culture, which is being organized by Drs. Josie Auger, Myra Tate, Nisha Nath, Caroline Green, and research assistant Michaela Lazan. It will be held on June 14th and 15th. I would also like to acknowledge the RAKE, Center for Architecture, Global Studies, Global Studio for hosting us. Thank you so much. Now, I would like to add a few housekeeping comments. We would like to kindly ask participants to turn their cameras off and mute themselves. Please feel free to make comments and ask questions in the chat. Our speakers will address your questions during the Q&A session at the end. And the order of the things are as follows. First, we will hear from Professor Manijeh Manani, Dean in the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, followed by words of acknowledgement and grounding in the land by J Series organizers, and followed by welcoming remarks from Priscilla Campo, who is Cree Sotal Chair and Program Administrator at Nukshahtowin, meeting place at Athabasca University. Priscilla will introduce our speakers, Simon Bird and Charlotte Ross. And now it is my pleasure to invite Dr. Manani, Dean in the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, to open J Series inaugural talk.
Thank you very much, Nina. As Nina said, my name is Manijeh Manani. I am the Dean in the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences and Professor of Literary Studies, Comparative Literature. It is my greatest honor to be saying a few opening words, opening remarks to start this inaugural event on the theme of justice. And I'm sure the organizers will let us know exactly what the term encompasses and the presenters. But it was almost over 16 months ago when Doctors Nina Polovikova, Suzanne McCullough, and Tobias Wiggins approached me with this brilliant idea of establishing two interrelated series on the theme of justice, a speaker series and a webinar series. I'm very pleased, I was very pleased and remain enthusiastic and really grateful for this work, which aligns with similar work, great work that's ongoing in the faculty, both in terms of course in program development, program regulation changes, as well as research on EDI related matter, on themes of sustainability and social justice. So decolonization, conciliation, and responses to the TRC calls to action. Our faculty members, staff, students have been very serious in responding to these urgent societal needs and in engaging their respective communities and community of scholars in the important work and scholarship that they do. So I forgot to mention my pronouns, she and her, and also to indicate that I live and work on Treaty 6 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota Sioux, and I'm very grateful for their gifts and the ability to work alongside other settlers on these lands. So without further ado, I just want to thank again the individuals who stepped forth with this idea, as I mentioned, Dr. Suzanne McCullough, Nina Pavlovakova, and Tobias Biggins, as well as the organizers of today's inaugural event, the same three people, and their research assistant, Priscilla McGreer. Very grateful to all of you for the great work and the time that you have put in. And I also want to welcome our speakers, Simon Bird and Charlotte Ross, who have given us their precious time to share their wisdom and knowledge with us, and a warm welcome to all members of FHSS, AU, and beyond for being here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manaji, for your kind opening remarks. I'm pleased to invite J-Series organizers to proceed with words of acknowledgement and grounding in the land.
Thank you, Nina. So I'd like to take a minute and speak on behalf of J-Series. We give thanks to Maria Campbell, Priscilla Campo, and Ivy Lalonde of the Nukshahtowin Center for sharing recipes, conversation, and the poetry of Louise Half, Sky Dancer, with us. We are grateful for the vision, ethics, and action outlined in the Nukshahtowin Plan, which states, and I quote, "As part of our ongoing commitment to Indigenous people in the land known as Canada, and in response to the calls to action of the TRC and the United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, we strive to move Indigenous knowledge into the mainstream university culture as a way of building a bridge between Indigenous and non-Indigenous people," end quote. So we acknowledge the land upon which many members of the Athabasca University community live are home to 48 First Nations. The land known as Alberta, Canada is covered by Treaties 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10, traditional territories of the Dene, Saulteaux, Nakota Sioux, Kainai, Piikani, Siksika, Sutene, Neheyau, Métis, Anishinaabe, Sakota Ixka. The treaties are building agreements between sovereign states that outline the obligations we all have to treaty areas. We commit to learning about and enacting our obligations to the land and to Indigenous peoples where we live.
Thank you so much.
Oh. So since we're all calling in from different areas, we're just going to now take a few moments, if it feels right for you, to invite a kind of collective turning inward to consider the land that you're currently on, wherever you're calling in from. So me and Priscilla here are just going to guide us through that. And so if you'd like, usually people all have their cameras on for this. So and I say, if you'd like, you can turn your camera off. So, you know, choose how you'd like your camera to be right now, on or off for this moment. And as we settle in to reflect, you could find yourself in a comfortable seat. So just notice how you feel where you're sitting or standing or lying down. Maybe you'd like to adjust. Just taking a few moments to notice. And once you've kind of settled and adjusted a little bit, it might feel right for you to close your eyes, or you might choose to leave them open. Just turning inward a bit more. Then you may turn your attention to your breath if it feels right, just noticing its rhythm. You could even explore taking a deeper in-breath and a deeper exhale. It might feel useful to just turn your attention to where your body is touching the ground. And as you reflect on that connection, you may notice how it feels. Is it soft, hard, cool, warm? And as you find yourself in this space, perhaps connecting to your breath and the ground beneath you, we'd like to just offer you a few guiding reflections.
You may think about the Indigenous people of the land you're on. Some of their names you have just heard, and perhaps there are many more for you to learn. You may think of those who are living on the land, those we remember and honor, and the future we hope for. Perhaps you may think about the beauty of the land and its host of human and non-human beings. You may honor the keepers of the land that sustains each of us and our communities.
So we'll just take a couple moments to sit with that. And then when you're ready, if you have been following along, you just find your way back into the space, maybe opening your eyes, maybe moving around a little bit, maybe turning your camera back off. And thank you everyone for participating in the way that you did. I'll pass it over to Nina.
Thank you so much, Susan, Priscilla, and Tobias, for guiding us through self-reflection as a meaningful way of acknowledging the land we live on. And now it is my pleasure to invite Chair and Program Administrator at Nukshahtowin, Priscilla Campo, to welcome our distinguished speakers.
Hello, thank you for that. That has been one of the most welcoming introductions that I've heard in a long time, and I enjoyed every minute of it. So my name is Priscilla Campo. I am from Muskowgan First Nation and Saskatchewan, Treaty 4, and I've been a visitor here in Treaty 6 territory in Edmonton and working with Athabasca University for the past 20-some years. And today I'm very pleased to be able to introduce us to two new speakers, two new to us speakers. Charlotte Ross is a citizen of the Montreal Lake Cree Nation located in northern Saskatchewan, one of 3 Woodland Cree First Nations that signed an adhesion to Treaty 6 in 1889. She is a mother to 3 sons and lives in Rosetown with her partner, Paul. She is a first language speaker of Woodland Cree TH dialect, has also taught the Plains Cree Y dialect, and understands the Swampy Cree dialect. Charlotte has been engaged in higher learning for the past 2 decades, and my elder Maria Campbell says hello to Charlotte. She says, I know her, and she says that I've probably met Charlotte too because my undergrad years were spent at the University of Saskatchewan. So welcome, Charlotte, to our virtual territory here. Charlotte is also a PhD candidate in Indigenous Language Revitalization at the University of Victoria and co-hosts a Cree language podcast called Pipiskawewin, and does host an online chat called Cree and Coffee. So welcome, Charlotte. Simon Bird is the father of 2 and husband of 22 years to Naomi Bird of the Thunderchild First Nation. Simon is Woodland Cree, member of the Peter Ballantyne Cree Nation, or as the locals call themselves, the Rock Cree. He's a language advocate and a fluent speaker of the YTH&N dialects of Cree. He's a learner of Anishinaabemowan, commonly known as the Ojibwe language. Considers himself a lifelong learner with an extensive background in education, including as a teacher, principal, and education director. He's currently the Director of Governance at the Assembly of First Nation and is also a PhD student in the Indigenous Language Revitalization at the University of Victoria. He calls Ottawa his home right now and works with First Nations and the federal government. He also hosts Cree Simon Says on Facebook groups and on YouTube. I believe I'm a member, so I've seen him on there too. So I would just like to give a hearty AU welcome to Simon and Charlotte, and I look forward to the conversation today. And I'd like to say a big thank you to Priscilla, Tobias, Nina, and Suzanne for putting this series together and for meeting with our elder and having those important conversations with her. Thank you very much.
Simon, the floor is yours. I would say, I think Charlotte probably will go first, right? Charlotte, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Nina. And I just wanted to say what a lovely way to start a session. Oh my gosh, I think I'll have to hire Tobias for all the sessions I do. You know, that's just a wonderful way to bring everybody together virtually because we're not able to physically be together. So Acknowledgement now, everybody who's here on the screen with us to share some time. And I also just wanted to say I'll start my little timer over here just in case I forget to do that. I have a PowerPoint that I'm going to share with you. So I have some images on that PowerPoint. Some of them may speak to your experiences as well. So I'm just going to start to share this one. Okay, kapati now, huh? You can see that screen? Somebody yes. Please say yes.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Sorry, I was muted.
Okay, thank you. This is the title of our talk, Revisiting and Reconnecting with Indigenous Language and Culture. And I'm really grateful to Athabasca University, to Simon, and just, you know, for being able to be here. So that I created this land and territory acknowledgement as well, because we're all, as Tobias said, and as Nina has said, we're all in different places right now. So I acknowledge and respect all the First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples on whose traditional territory we are all privileged to be broadcasting from, and for the Indigenous peoples whose historical relationships with the land connects us for time immemorial. I'm out actually on the island. I'm out in Vancouver Island. I'm in Victoria, as Nina mentioned, I think, and Priscilla mentioned as well. You know, Simon and I are both PhD students, so I'm here doing my classwork or doing my candidacy. Finished my candidacy, but I'm in my program doing work for a few days. So I'm out here in a territory that my friend and relative was before he went to Toronto. So Harold Johnson was a really well-known writer and author, speaker. And I thought, you know, I wanted to start the PowerPoint, I wanted to start this session just acknowledging all of the work that that he contributed. And, you know, 4 days before his passing into the spiritual life, our spiritual world, you know, he did his last interview with CBC Radio. And, you know, one of the things that he shared was, and now I understand everything is story. Everything is story. You just tell stories. And so I invite you to, as Tobias said, you know, open your ears, open your eyes, open your minds to all that is possible. I greet all of you that are here in this room. Charlotte Ross the Tistiason, Muniao Saga, you know, Tigagi Piopigian. So Charlotte Ross is my name, and I was raised literally all around the lake at Montreal Lake Cree Nation in northern Saskatchewan. Magasaw Nuki Wigian. But I'm living in the south, so I live in Rosetown now. In Naskamawa Goge, Athabasca University Gatoskitsig, Ipintumiag, at Sidaw to be Big Squayag. So I thank, you know, Athabasca University for calling us, for doing the protocol to ask if we could come and just share some time, share some story. As I was preparing for this session, I thought, you know, I don't have all the answers. I don't profess to have any answers at all. I have lots of insights. And so everybody has a piece of the puzzle for all of our situations. So we're all together going to create that picture. Then and Simon Kapiwi Summit. So I want to, you know, say thanks to Simon, to my relative, for inviting me along. So Simon said, do you think you could come over here and come and help me, or if you're interested in doing this? And, you know, with what Simon does, he would say, Charlotte, do you want to come to the moon? I'd say, sure, okay, just give me a minute. I have to pack a bag. Because I have a lot of trust in Simon, and I believe that what he does is good medicine. We staminay tapuritak. O man hidawin. Ipapasuk tamag. Bigskriwen. So because we have a shared passion to strengthen the language, to strengthen our culture, to know who we are, so that we can help others, and in the process we help ourselves in doing that. And prayers were said earlier on, and these are some of the words that I say on a daily basis. Isemanto mamutawi mao. You know, great creator, father of all. So I'm really grateful that you've loaned me one more day. You know, so that we could try real hard to think good thoughts. You know, try real hard to speak really well, to be careful of what we say, of how we say things. To try and live a real good life. You know, that's what I pray for every day. We make offerings for Iga awiyag tamay pagamskago. So, you know, we make offerings that what we share today, that it doesn't hit anybody the wrong way, and that, you know, people can take from what Simon and I will share and take it and sit on it, or listen to it, or reflect on it. So we don't know anything at all, is what that statement says. So we're still learning, you know, we're still learning from our elders, we're learning from our knowledge keepers. We're babies, we're still just crawling around on the floor, but we have a little bit of knowledge that we can share with you. And so with a real humble heart and kindness and generosity, I want to start my presentation. As a visitor to these beautiful territories that I've been in since July 2019, and that's where I start my journey in terms of my PhD. I'm on the West Coast, And you know, a lot of individuals ask, well, why are you in Victoria? You know, why have you gone so far away to do your studies? And you know, one of the things that that comes up every time we come out is, why are you going to the University of Victoria? You know, you don't have a university at home, and we do have universities at home, but how we learn is that we venture out. That's part of our learning, part of our growth. It takes a lot to come to a place that you don't know anybody, where you're not in your own familiar territory. And so it's built on relationships. You know, that's why I'm out here. And that relationship is built on trust. It started really with the University of Saskatchewan, bringing out the university, inviting, establishing relationship with the University of Victoria to bring people out who are doing master's program in Indigenous Language Revitalization. So I witnessed the program in action. I met key individuals like late Dr. Trish Rossborough and Dr. Onawa McIver. So there were key individuals. It was a 2-year process. I had no business pursuing a PhD. I wasn't interested in pursuing a PhD. In fact, the PhD program pursued me. There was a courtship period, about a 2-year courtship period of building relationship, learning how to dance, learning how to cook, learning how to communicate, and then celebrating with the first Miller program that we had in Saskatchewan. So I've had advantages that I've been placed in places of privilege, that I've been able to witness, you know, what can happen. We're in a cohort model. So the cohort model is half of the solution. And so I just wanted to start with that, because that frames everything else. That frames the whole story that I will tell you. How do Indigenous worldviews alter how we see our place and contributions to the world through, you know, these 3 R's: respect, reciprocity, and responsibility for our actions? My worldview, I'm going to share with you. I'm going to share with you through images. This is the first, I guess, paper model or paper writing about the Cree worldview, First Nations historical worldview, through the Office of the Treaty Commissioner. That's where the material is posted from. And it was elders in Saskatchewan that were working together. So when we see, you know, all of these circles and all of these pieces, the human being is way down here, way at the bottom. You know, we're not at the top of the food chain. We're at the bottom of the food chain because we are reliant and dependent on everything else in that chain that goes through. We're in relationship. So our language shows that we're in relationship continually with all of these pieces, all of these parts that are considered in our world to be animate. So in our worldview with Indigenous languages, there's differences between what's animate and what's inanimate, and that determines, you know, which verb do you use, which noun do you use, how do you establish that relationship with that person. So I ask you to ask yourself, you know, what is your worldview? How did you get to be where you are? And how does that worldview interact with, how does it intersect with the Indigenous community worldview that you're located on, that you live on, that you have relationships with individuals in your territory? For me, I'm a Cree woman. I'm a grandmother, a mother, sister, auntie, cousin, sister-in-law, you know, all of these pieces. I'm a student. I do consultant training, facilitating. I work to support the language, all of our language aspects, culture, history. I'm a builder of dreams. I like to light the way for others to find their way. I love berry picking. I love fishing. You know, that's where I grew up, was on the land. So snaring, cooking, rabbit soup, like those are the types of things that define me, that show me who I am and where I'm from. I was born into the Woodland Cree language, as Priscilla said, my first language, but I was also adopted into the Plains Cree families that I've lived and worked with in the last probably 30 years. I really don't know how old I am anymore, but I've somewhere up there. I've been living, I think, in the southern part of the province for probably a good 30 years or so. So language defines who you are. It defines our experiences as we come into the world. And, you know, in the Cree language, you know, the worldview is surrounded by kindness, generosity, the good of all, the greater good for everyone, so that everybody's taken care of, not me personally. I don't put my needs ahead of the greater group. And so those are the values that we were raised with in the language. So when that happens and it's based on the land, so based on teachings on the land needs to be nourished because the land is providing for us. So we have a relationship with the animals, with the fish, the plants, and the berries, and there's ceremonies that happen with all of that. And so one of the first things that happened was that our traditional spiritual practices were outlawed by the Indian Act in 1884 because they were so strong and our people were so connected to the land and to the animals through ceremonial practice. So as a form of colonization and assimilation, though the Indian Act put that into place in 1884, you know, that it was banned and it was outlawed. Simultaneously, just a few years later, forced attendance in residential schools became mandatory. Status Indians were enfranchised for pursuing a university degree, so you couldn't be educated in a university setting as well as retaining your status, your Indian status, according to the Indian Act. So it was illegal to practice ceremonies, forced to go underground, or became so secret that no one felt safe to talk about them, which was the case in my family. We were systematically disconnected from our traditional practices through this enforced legislation, which then results in, you know, PTSD. There's levels and waves of PTSD. So the tsunami of, you know, PTSD, colonization, the effects of that are not finished in one generation. So we're still dealing with the tsunamis that have happened, that continue to happen. And part of the rules are don't talk about it, don't trust anybody, and don't feel. So we've had to unlearn those rules by learning how to talk, learning how to trust, and how to feel through higher education. So first of all, learning about it in books that, you know, we didn't have access to as we were coming through the K-12 system, but then also going to the elders' teachings. So the books could only answer part of the history. They didn't have the full history. They didn't have the full cultural teachings that we needed. So, you know, there's book learning, there's academic reading, but you also have to balance that with elders' teachings. And the elders' teachings have to be first and foremost the first piece that we're learning about in order for the academic pieces to have any context. And then I also was part of women's gatherings, women's wellness gatherings, and that those issues were being talked about. You know, as a young person, I watched and I learned. So to have reconciliation, that was one of the topics we talked about for this session. You know, we must undergo this piece called self-reflection, which is sometimes really hard because we're not in a society that really pursues or promotes self-reflection to see, you know, what has my role been? What have I been an accomplice to? An unknown accomplice or a known accomplice? What are my beliefs? What are some of the values that I have inherited from family, community, society, institution? And how is that impacting the Indigenous peoples that whose land I'm on, whose land we're all on? So we have to start within. So for me, it was to heal me, to first of all figure out, how did we get to be beggars in our own land? And how did I get into foster care, becoming a permanent ward of the state when I had a functional family, I had a functional home, and how did that all become destroyed? So it took really going through a lot of hardships to really understand where we needed to go back to. So there's a lot of truth telling for my own family, for my community, and, you know, going back to the cultural teachings. So to make change, we have to be the change. So we have to actually make the change personally in our own lives. And these are my parents, Nukshahtowin, and they were my first teachers, along with my mom's mom lived with us. And so Nokum was also one of our first teachers, one of my first teachers. And this is Nokum in the middle. So this is my mom's mom, and my mom is on her left. And then my mom's aunt, my mom's sister, I guess my auntie, you know, language was what we spoke. That was the only language that we knew. And so, you know, my first learning circle, I guess, was in the circle of the kitchen, in the circle of berry picking, in the circle of making fish, making meat, and, you know, doing all of these activities in the language. But we also were non-status. And so we didn't live on the reserve, but I didn't know why we didn't live on the reserve. I didn't know why until long time later that I went to university, learned about Indian studies, Native studies, Indigenous studies, and then, you know, came home and asked questions. And so I would always say, we got snagi nigamoyak. Did we ever sing? You know, we got snagi nimitoyak. Did we ever have dances like pow dancing? Did we ever have ceremonies? And my dad would always say, no, we never did any of that. But I accepted what he shared, what he stated. And then I stopped at home one time and at the trap line, and I could smell sweetgrass. And so I said, you know, I'm pretty sure I'm going crazy. I said, are these the first signs, you know, when you start smelling things that aren't there? And he said, no. He said, you're not going crazy. He said, it's hanging right there above your head. And so it was about 73, I think. He was 73 years old. So it was a good 63 years that he didn't tell anybody about ceremonies. So we grew up in the church, in the Anglican church, knew nothing at all about ceremonies growing up. And so it wasn't until I was much later as an adult that I discovered that actually we had ceremonies in our family, and it was him, his mother, all of her brothers, and he was the helper. Is what he shared. And so, you know, just that whole loss of traditional cultural knowledge and the fear was still there. So I was given the phone number to a lawyer in Prince Albert who could come and bail me out of jail, because if anybody found out that he had the sweetgrass, he would get arrested, I would get arrested, we'd all get thrown into jail. And so, you know, that was quite a realization in that afternoon that I sat and listened to the story of, and there are many people who don't ever feel safe to tell the story. So lots of stories don't get told. And so I just really am grateful that that did happen when it did happen. And then he was also misnamed at birth, or renamed at birth, I should say, renamed at baptism, because we were non-status. So they were told to leave the reserve. That a piece of paper said she was being enfranchised. And so when that happened, then they lived at the north end of the lake, off the reserve. But when he turned 65, he had to get a birth certificate, and they couldn't find one. So the lawyer friend he had did a search, and, you know, he searched first within the band records, or Indian Affairs records, I guess. And that's where he found that my dad's mom, my paternal grandmother, had never been removed. She'd never been taken off the band list. So then when I was in foster care, I went in as a Métis or non-status, I guess, and then came out of foster care, and I was a status Indian. And so, you know, that whole process of, you know, your legal identity and what does it mean? All I knew was that I spoke Cree before I went into foster care. I spoke very little Cree when I was in foster care because there was nobody to speak to. And then I had to relearn how to speak my language. I didn't know how to write it. So I went to university and learned how to write it with late Frida Ahenikyu, and then mentored with Frida to teach at the NORTEP program. So when I looked at our history, this is what I found. You know, there's a cycle of abuse. with the roots that are in oppression, colonization, you know, the papal bulls, and, you know, all of those pieces that are at the foundation of where we're at. So when we take a look at where our families are, where our communities are today, that's the top of the trees. That's what we're seeing, you know, that's what's come out. But really the roots are what we have to go back to. So how was it that we were legally enforced to culturally assimilate into a society that was not ours? And how did we resist? So we resisted by going to the land, you know, going to the land and connecting with our relatives. And that's really where the hope is, and where the practitioners are located is on the land. So when we do our fishing in the fall time, and Simon's family does fishing as well up at Reindeer Lake. And so, you know, I'm usually the one who takes the fish in. So I take the fish in, and then there's, you know, the South End boys, South End guys. And, you know, it's the camaraderie of being out on the lake and fishing. So we're at the Auckland Lake. We have the fishing license, family license for that lake. And I've also been able to travel to other places and get to know, expanding my circle. So Reconnecting is a core principle, a core value. Like, who are you related to? You know, that's the first thing that any elders or any knowledge keepers, anybody in community asks. Who are you related to? Who are you connected to? And so really happy to hear Maria Campbell. She's a relative as well. Hear her greetings, because it warms my heart to know that, you know, she's out here, you know, she's involved. She's one of our great heroes. Another hero that I have is my late mom, Dr. Lenore Stiffarm from Fort Belknap Indian Reservation in Montana. So our Reconnecting knows no boundaries. The legal boundaries, the land boundaries between provinces and between, you know, countries. We preceded that. Our involvement, our occupation on the land, our relationship with the land precedes all of the provincial boundaries, the legal boundaries that are here between our two countries. So it really has taken me back to reconnecting to traditional knowledge and ceremonies. And, you know, I really am grateful for the language, grateful to know the language, grateful to share and learning about ceremonies. You know, I wasn't raised in a ceremonial family, but I have a lot of ceremony in my family. And so because it wasn't allowed to be talked about, you know, we couldn't practice it. But there was a lot of ceremony in our family and in the community. I've got a few slides here that I'm not going to go into a lot of detail with, but they're surrounding, you know, the women's role with TP teachings. And so when we think about, you know, each of these values, you know, each of the values is a TP pole. So the first three, you know, Mary Lee's, Elder Mary Lee's resident in Saskatoon, I do a lot of work with her. You know, you need those first three, you know, nanahitamwin, kisteitoin, tapuitaman. You need obedience, respect, and humility first. You have to have those first three in order to have the rest fall into place. And they have to be put up in a certain way. There's a skill to that. And so our community and my own family has really gone from a cultural loss to cultural teachings and embracing the teachings. So in any way we can, you know, through dance, through language, through song, through being involved in Indigenous languages. This is the Miller cohort that was 2016 to 2018. Our language is Squeal. No, even the word fire is a derivative of Squeal and Midday. So really, it's a woman's heart. So there's a lot of teachings around the fire and the men's role. You know, what's the men's role with regard to fire? You know, that's a teaching. That's a tobacco teaching that, you know, you would take tobacco to your elder and ask them, what is this? You know, how does this work? And it's going to come to pass, you know, whichever elders you're working with. I have a couple pictures here of Gladys Walpaskari. I'm adopted into her family and Thunderchild as well. And then my dad's on this far right hand pose. he was always a character. So he was always, you know, joking around and taking all kinds of funny pictures because he was not allowed to be a child. So he allowed himself to be a child as he was an adult.
Charlotte, sorry, this is just a kind reminder, 5 minutes. I really,
Oh, yeah.
I really hate doing this, sorry.
No, that's okay, thank you. And so I really, really believe, you know, synergy is the key to working together. And, you know, we were listening to the Governor General yesterday here at the University of Victoria. There was a special visit. And, you know, she resonates with the same. So, you know, working together to create a brighter and a better future. So reconciliation. But to have reconciliation, you have to have something to reconcile. So what is it that you want to bring to the relationship? What can I do? Where do I start? Who are my partners? Like, where do I begin? And that's why the series is here, is to begin to ask questions, you know, within your own program, within your own department. And I've timed it exactly to finish at almost 5 minutes to the hour. So I'm finished that portion. And I just wanted to say, you know, I'm really grateful to be a part of this series, and can't say thanks enough to Simon. And, you know, I did the little part in Cree and in English at the very beginning. So I'm really grateful to be here and happy to share the stage with Simon, somebody that I really admire and really trust. And really, if Simon did say, Charlotte, can you come to the moon? I would say, sure, Simon, I'll be there in 2 minutes. Just give me a few minutes to pack a bag.
Thank you so much, Charlotte, for these humble, beautiful words and the, you know, words of sharing your journey. And I would like to encourage the audience to share the words of thank you in the chat. And now I would like to give the floor to Simon.
Tinige, as the we Woodland speakers like to say thank you. And the Y dialect, we say aye, aye, aye. Charlotte, I always learn something new when you present and how much we have in common. So, Kinanaskambit, and thank you very much. And Treaty Day, when I have my $5, we will go to the moon. All right. I come to you from Ottawa, downtown. I find myself here. My two children are exploring some opportunities. My son is in Carleton University, and my daughter is in high school with my wife. Working at Carleton University as a research facilitator for Indigenous engagement. And here is where it all began. The young man there with the Bruce Lee haircut, that would be myself. And Nukshahtowin, my dad, on the shores of, actually right in the middle of Reindeer Lake. Reindeer Lake, for those of you wondering where it is, I will show you exactly where it is in the map. And again, Ninanaskamun, I'm very, very grateful. Kinanaskamun now, it is you I am grateful for, all of you. And this is, again, a little bit of my background story. Something that I'm learning in my PhD work here is, of course, self-location and how we're connected. That chubby man right there is myself. Family was worried that I may have had childhood diabetes, but as you actually seen there in my formative years, that worry kind of dissipated. This is my mom and my two siblings. Nukshahtowin, my late younger sibling, and of course Nukshahtowin, my sister Pearl. And my family adopted our younger sister and my youngest sister, Nukshahtowin, my siblings. So again, Nukshahtowin and Nigawi. And here we have Bruce Lee fans growing up on the res. Everybody had, of course, back in the 70s, 80s, into the 90s, and even today, you're going to have a huge fan base of Indigenous people being connected to someone a lot more similar than them, displayed on pop culture, and also, of course, movies. And of course, everybody wanted to be either Jackie Chan or Bruce Lee. Boys anyways, and I know a lot of girls, they fought tooth and nail with any boys that want to scrap. And this is what my dad still does today, and my mom. This picture was taken in Athabasca in northern Manitoba, the Pas, Manitoba. And he started off dog mushing, and that is really what introduced me as a young boy to listen and hear other dialects, and especially the Y dialect and the N dialect. The N dialect, of course, a lot of it is in northern Manitoba. And that really gave me an ear to listen to the way different people spoke from different communities. And here, of course, is Nogum Pan, Nogum, my grandmother, my late grandmother, at one of our last visits. In her later years, she had a form of dementia. And she always greeted me like I just came from the boat. That almost, that always kind of teared me up. And she was in Prince Albert, Kistapinanig, is the traditional name for Prince Albert, which literally means permanent settlement. For those of you that speak Cree, you can hear that word ape in there. Kistapinanig, the place where you sit permanently. Of course, that name can be argued existed well before contact. It's a natural meeting place for a lot of our people that went north and south, and there is one of the natural places that people traded, much like the story behind Ottawa for thousands of years. And today, this is my family. This picture was taken about 3 years ago. Niwigamagan, my spouse. That word, Niwigamagan, literally means the one I live with. And so that can apply to, of course, a husband or a wife. And that big man right there is Nigosis, and that cool young lady is Nitanis. So many decisions have been made to make sure that my children, my family always are at the forefront of best decisions collectively. And once again, a picture of my first teacher. And today I want to talk about my connection and my reconnection. And the theme of my presentation is connection. And it's becoming more and more relevant as I'm spending more time away from home, coming from Ottawa, and identifying with exactly why people are utilizing social platforms as a way to connect. There's a missing piece inside of somebody when you don't have the language around you, and that's the story I'm going to tell and the role that I hope to fill and I try to fill every day in terms of helping those people connect and reconnect. So again, I want to talk about my best teacher and my worst teacher. To the left is my grandmother and I. To my right is my father and I. I just wanted to contrast these two teachers of mine to help people understand the natural cycle of our language. And I always try to think of 60 scoop survivors, residential school survivors that have never had an opportunity to have the upbringing that myself and Charlotte had around family, around traditional practices, and seeing adults become elders young people become adults and seeing young people move in these different cycles of being where they're supposed to be. When you take somebody and you don't show them a community and you don't give them an opportunity to witness this cycle, they come back with something of a, what Charlotte says, PTSD, and forever wondering and also blaming maybe their parents or their families for not teaching them the language, a definite anger towards the government and all assimilation practices that took them away, that painted their existence as having to really missed out an opportunity to what makes an Indigenous person whole. And a lot of that is language. And the reason why I call my father one of my worst teachers is that's absolutely how I felt when I was growing up. My dad was all business all the time, even though he only went up to grade 6, and he made a life from fishing and trapping, and then eventually opening up a general store, a small confectionery on the First Nation. But my dad has since become very soft in his later years. Of course, he's not a very old man by many standards. He's 62 years old. But when I was growing up, I seen my grandmother as the most patient, generous, and absolutely compassionate teacher. Any questions I had, my grandmother was there. She spent time and she answered all those questions. My dad would say, "Awas, atuski, get to work." We still to this day, if we ever get a chance to have lunch or supper, you'll see me finish my plate off real fast, because I was taught if you don't eat now, you're not going to eat. But because there's always something to be done. It was always go, go, go. And something changed is because I started hearing stories of my grandmother and how hard she was on her kids. My grandmother is absolutely one of my role models that changed the whole dynamic of our extended family, because she absolutely said no alcohol in her house. 5'1" or maybe 5 feet. My grandmother was not a very tall person, a tall lady, but to me, in my eyes, I said this at her funeral. 6 feet, 7 foot lady in terms of the way I seen her, just an incredible force to be reckoned with. And I learned to connect the pieces of my dad and how hard he was in terms of the language, the teaching, the work ethic. And then seeing my grandmother, how compassionate, generous and hardworking she was right up until her 80s. The same spirit of compassion, the same spirit of generosity, the same spirit of patience is now with my dad as he surrounds himself with grandchildren, and knowing that our time together is very limited, as I am far away from home, and whenever I call him up, he'll pick up the phone. And if I say, let's go hunting, he'll clear his schedule and we'll do a quick hunt. And that's something that I am exploring, and I don't think there's enough talk about it. And if you know of some studies of this cycle and how the language and how teachers enter your life at different stages, please let me know. Forward me some of that stuff. And this is something that I learned very early on when I was this young man right here on the right of my screen. At 10 years old, I'd be asking questions because something told me that one day I would need to supply the answers of many of our kids that went out to residential schools that came back and tried to speak the language. And there was this lateral violence of if you mispronounced something, you were teased. And of course, a lot of these kids, they didn't even try because they were taught if you spoke the language, you were strapped. Those older generations had children. They didn't encourage them to speak the language. My grandmother, Nogum, she didn't go to residential school. She was what we call, the government called non-status. So she was left up north. She was born in the trap line. The roads came in when she was an adult and no schools. The planes came in and took some of the kids that were considered status. And why is that some of our people, especially Northerners, were left for the most part without as aggressively being assimilated? And that's something that I want to talk a little bit more about. Is if you take a look at my home community, South End, which is on the South End shores of Reindeer Lake, and you can see Lac La Ronge, and you can see, of course, Montreal Lake. And, you know, this is what we call a traditional territory. And this whole map is somewhat of a, you know, my grandmother and her brothers they would explore this land, and they would go down south as far as Cumberland House, Prince Albert, and they would be going up north to winter trap lines, going on the north end of Reindeer Lake, hunting caribou, you know, and then they would have neighbors nobody really fought over the land. There was just understood agreements that this land had plenty and that plenty was definitely meant to be shared, but no fixed address. That community of South End was one of those natural stopping places as people went to the north or people went south. And that's something that I think is very important to remember and to just note as part of my presentation, because it helps realize the connection and how small the world is, especially that connection to Montreal Lake. And the reason why I say, you know, Rock Cree is very, for me, you know, it's common sense. It's because we live amongst the Precambrian Shield. And of course, the river system is you know, our traditional highways, our route systems. And this is my Nukshahtowin, my dad, and Nukshahtowin, my brother-in-law, on one of our traditional trap lines, just north of my home community of South End. And you can start piecing the puzzles of that traditional highway and how the fur trade had an impact of the language coming from the east and strengthening it down the river. You know, it can be argued that of course, the Cree language, in some of your research, or you may not know, or you may know that a lot of our strongest language speakers are towards the east, towards the north, and we start seeing how connected the Y dialect is to the TH, to the TH, to the N, to the N, to Nagaway, from Nagaway to Anishinaabemowin. So again, learning a bit of our history and then seeing why things are the way they are. Very passionate, strong proponent of making sure that we don't forget that our history explains why some things are called or some terms are more prevalent in certain areas and maybe not in others. And again, I just wanted to hit home on this point that our traditional waterways that connects everything from the Hudson's Bay right down to Amisquachi, Waskahigani, Edmonton. And you can see that river system. You can see how connected everything is. And I have to say that in the days of using canoes and following the river systems, our people were much more connected back then than now, even though we have emails, texting, cell phones, trains, planes, automobiles, and highways. You got to understand that a lot of our people, they spent weeks and months just to go visit on an annual basis their relatives. They would go upstream, they would go downstream, they would go south, they would go north. So this connection is something that should never be overlooked. And that's one of the reasons why I really am a strong proponent of teaching how much more we have in common than we don't when it comes to our Cree language, and how similar and how much we have in common for other Indigenous languages. Just a brief example. People say, how do you say the Cree word for Alberta? Or Manitoba? You got to think that's actually the wrong context. There were no provinces. First of all, the way the provinces are shaped, it's not conducive, or it did not give any consideration to the to geography itself. If anything, we should be having provinces that go in terms of east to west, because that's the river system. To think, how do you say Alberta in Cree? You're playing into the hands of the colonizers' history. You name that territory by the nations that are there, and you say those are the land of this nation or the land of that nation. And so, to compromise, people will start to say, as this side of the mountains. But of course, north in Peace River, Fort McMurray area, Fort Chipewyan, they don't have any mountains. So that only, the narrative is very loose. And again, more or less not putting it in the context of traditional terms, in terms of how our First Nations people saw the land and what it was for, and the natural geographic territories that existed for North and South. Again, Nogum was one of my most generous teachers. I'd ask her questions, and she would often be doing traditional practices, such as taking care of moose hides, taking care of the dogs. We had a lot of dogs all the time. Hence, those were work dogs, trap line dogs, and eventually for racing. And so when I was a young boy, I asked my grandmother said, "Pitigui, get in, hurry up. Kidipa, and she was talking about the thunderstorm that was coming. And that word literally means they're calling. And in my community, much like what Charlotte was talking about, we had churches. We had the Roman Catholic Church, and eventually different denominations would come in. And the language retained teachings. If you as a young kid or as a human being, an adult, paid attention to the language and the words themselves, it allowed you to ask specific questions and to really learn that our language has clues, pieces of history, and parts of worldview. But without knowing those questions and not knowing the language, it was very hard to understand what life was like before churches, before the banishment of traditional practices. And so when my grandmother said, Kittuak, everybody in my community understood Kittuak as thunder. And I said, as a young boy of about 10, 11 years old, I said, who is calling? And she said, she looked at me like, don't you know? But she didn't say anything. She just kind of gave me this look. And she said, Pidisuak. In the white dialect, we say Piesuak. And dialect, we say Pinesuak, the Thunderbirds. And she proceeded to tell me how the Thunderbirds lived in the clouds, and that the lightning came from the thunderbolts, where it came from the Thunderbird beings, even though these teachings were not shared amongst our young people, and those teachings were more or less frowned upon. And so one of the stories I asked, when I looked out the window around that same time, I seen the frame of a sweat, a dome made of saplings. And I asked my grandmother, "What is that? I seen that in the book, a sweat lodge, matutsan." And she said, "Oh, no, that's not a matutsan." She said, of course, we're talking in language. And she said, "Kimusom, your grandfather uses that to smoke hides." And there was inside the dome was a fire pit. I said, "Okay." And she proceeded to tell me, I asked my grandmother, "Is that wrong? How come we don't have any of the sweats? How come we don't have drums? How come we don't have singing?" Because, back in the 80s, the powwows were starting to really come around in some of the southern communities. And I said, "Is that wrong?" And my grandmother said, "No, it's not. It's just another way of going to the Creator." And it made me realize how tolerant her thinking is, as somebody that never went to a residential school, as somebody that always spent time in the north, as somebody that was born on the trap line, as somebody that spent time in winter camps and summer camps and visiting families when she was a young person, weeks at a time and even months at a time. And it made me realize that the river system not only connected us physically, but it really helped our languages, because you appreciated another person's different way of speaking. Because if they had an accent, you knew that they were from somewhere else. And if they spoke a different language, you definitely knew that they were from somewhere else. And what a lot of our old people always paid attention, if you spoke differently, that means that you retained a different way of understanding. And so that tolerance and that ability to connect to other people and appreciate who they were, and always finding ways of how we're connected. We always called our families by family terms. Was not a common practice to name somebody by anything but how you were connected with them. Numosom, my grandfather, Nogom, Nuhtawi, Nuchawis, Nitosis, all these complex terms. That's why a lot of our indigenous people today say, you try to ask a young person to do a family tree. You don't do that, because you don't want to discover what's in that family tree, because at one time, it was permitted to actually intermarry within different parts of your family. And a lot of our elders would say, too close. If your mom's sister's kids, those were too close. Your dad's brother's kids, those were too close. But vice versa. There's a term today, we call it nichamos. We call it my sweetheart, but it's also a cross cousin. My mom's brother's kids, and that girl on that side of the family, that would be long time ago, that would be somebody that we could be permitted to marry at a given age. Now, I have friends from all over the world. One of my friends says we still do that in this part of the world. And, it really is that Western colonization that really forced people to abandon their ways and to feel shame of everything about them. And of course, we kind of do that today, not knowing that, we're perpetuating those stereotypes and perpetuating those and really seeing your way as the wrong way. We often point to church, but I do know that a lot of people did not go to church, and they perpetuated that shame and guilt that people were made to feel, because Eventually, that river system that connected all of us, that made us tolerant, that made us appreciate everybody's differences, that made us see that community downstream or upstream as our relatives. We became this stagnant, separate pools as we were segregated on reservation systems. And as you can see, again, that the river system that once connected all of us is again, a pure fascination of mine. And that's why, you know, if you take a look at the green parts here, especially between Saskatchewan and Manitoba, a lot of that were the same lifestyles, the same people. And then all of a sudden, the provinces came in the early 1900s, and really in 2 generations, we no longer seen those people as our same people. We've seen Saskatchewan people as our people. You know, again, totally disregarding the history that we had and playing into the hands of what now is written. All of a sudden, we're all cheering for the Saskatchewan Rough Riders when maybe we have more in common with the Blue Bombers. So that's just a side note, probably a very bad example, but it is an example nonetheless. Now,
I'm very sorry, and again, I hate doing this, but probably if you can wrap up in 3 minutes so that we have a time for 1 or 2 questions, because
no problem.
I'm
so again, this is traditional territory of our Woodland Cree, and there you have Montreal Lake, there you have Lac La Ronge, and into Manitoba, TH speaking dialect people. And today, I just want to point out, in Canada, it is estimated that more than 50% of the Indigenous population now live in cities. And a lot of that history of disconnection stems from a lot of things that are listed on this list, and many more that you already know. And what I do on social media is I really prevent language bullying. And my thinking is, I'm so blessed to have language speakers when I was growing up. What about those residential school survivors that don't have anybody, that has lost everybody in their languages, and their families that spoke the language, and their communities that have totally lost the language? So that's a role that I do. Again, so much more I can talk about in my community in the 80s, 90s, and what it looked like. And I just wanted to end with my question that I'm playing around with. It might change, but what role does social media play in Indigenous languages? And this is what you'll find on Facebook. It's something that I do commit to every day for the past 7 years, since 2015. And that's all I do, is one word at a time. I try to help people ignite that small fire within them to start asking questions and to build a small foundation in terms of getting a couple words right so they can ask those couple words to fluent speakers such as Charlotte or anybody else that still retains that piece of the puzzle that we're all looking for out there. So with that said, this is where I'm going to end. Thank you so much. Any questions? Let us know.
Thank you so much, Simon, for beautiful words of wisdom and for reminding us that languages are not just empty, structures of words, but they have meaningful ways of delivering values, different concepts, different way of thinking. And it is very critical to connect revitalization of indigenous languages with protection of our land, because they create one ecosystem. Now, I would like to invite everyone to ask questions if you have any. We believe that we have really wonderful folks in this presentation today. If you feel comfortable, please just show us your faces and ask the questions directly. If I see already a few messages. Let me just check if there is a question. There is lots of thank you to Simon, of course. So I'll
want to
read these thank yous. Yes.
If people want to ask a question, they can also just raise their hand, and then we'll know and go through that in sequence. So feel free.
So I would start. We can wait a little bit for people to type their questions, but I'll just grab the privilege, and I apologize for that to the group, to asking the question about the term that I've heard recently, the calls for radical revitalization of Indigenous languages. And what should we do as settlers to make this happen? Because I read it not only, as I've mentioned earlier, not only as revitalization of language and culture, but also reconnecting and rescuing the land from, from all the damage that is happening to the land today. So, and you can both answer if you're comfortable. I'll probably give the space to Charlotte first.
Sure, Indina, I was just going to say, we're all in this together, and there's no way to get out of it but together, and some of us have little pieces of the puzzle and some of us have bigger pieces of the puzzle, and we don't know exactly what the picture looks like, but it's a beautiful picture when we all put our little pieces together. So that's just the part that I want to say, is we all have a role to play.
Thank you. Simon, do you have any words of wisdom for us?
I hope I didn't talk too fast. I do want to say thank you to Charlotte. I know some of our PhD cohort have joined the presentation. For myself, I just want to say that Charlotte and that cohort, I absolutely admire them. Right now, I'm painfully suffering through my own studying, and I also want to say that any second language speaker that has learned an Indigenous language of their own people as an adult, it's amazing what you do. That to me is far greater. As an adult, to come back and to revitalize something when you weren't around it is I think a very unique perspective that'll benefit more people that come from the same place. For myself, being surrounded by the language gives me a different perspective, but I still can't identify with the struggles that people have that have learned the language as adults and as silent speakers in terms of what Charlotte is studying. And so I try to connect with people. I try to make those connections. I don't know how long I'll be around social media. It is a deadly place sometimes, and I'm just trying to make sure that I give the spotlight to other people as fast as possible, and so they can carry on that passion.
Yeah, for those of you who don't know, Simon is hosting a beautiful Facebook page which is called Simon Says, and he's teaching us Cree words in a really meaningful, sometimes fun way that is reconnected to Indigenous heritage. It's really, I strongly recommend to search him up on Facebook page. But that said, I have one question here from Susan for Charlotte, and I'll read it for you, Charlotte. Thank you for sharing with us. I really connected with what you said about self-reflection. How does understanding what one has been an accomplice in help to make space for different futures?
So the teachings that I've received from the elders that, nothing good will happen when we lay blame. It's not about laying blame. It's about taking a look at what has our role been. Where have we traveled? What has been our travel? What has been our path? And so when we're doing education sessions or sharing the language or, doing different things, it's not to bring, because that blame part and, who's doing what, who did what to who, there's an educational piece, but it's to leave it there and then to think, how can we build a better future? How can we build a brighter future together, working together? So what do I not know about? Because there's not any possible way for one person to know everything about all the world, cultures, and languages. And so we're learning all the time. And so I think, you know, I have a responsibility to learn just as much as I have a responsibility to teach.
Thank you so much.
And there is one question or request from Glenn Farrelly. Thanks for the great talk. Simon, you mentioned your social media work. Can you share the username of your public accounts? Maybe you can put them in the chat and people can have a look later.
Yeah, thank you. I did. There's no public accounts. It's actually a private group. For it to be public, I'd have to delete 20,000 people, and that's too much work.
Wonderful. So I don't see any more questions. So I'll give, I'm going to ask one more time. Is there any other question from the audience? Would you like to show your face and ask directly? Okay, if not, I would like to, or is there Manisha? Yes,
Manisha.
I see.
Okaskina Wahamageo Simon, Manisha, Tanse Charlotte, both of them are very good teachers, my teachers. So my question to both of them is to tell us a little bit more about the new things they're doing for language revitalization and their doctorate thesis. You know, what are they focusing on?
So what? Tanse, Manisha. I'm really excited about being a PhD student, and I'm not sure if that's normal or abnormal, or, you know, I'm not sure what's happening, but I absolutely love being a student. I don't ever want to grow up. I don't want to ever have to adult, but I guess I am adulting at the same time because I'm doing some consulting and training. But I really love being a student and I love learning. And so I've always been a lifelong learner of either, you know, going into a program to learn or learning from everybody that I'm around. So asking questions and observing. So my area of study is actually adult Cree silent speakers, and Simon mentioned it. It's looking at, you know, what have been the experiences of adult Cree individuals who understand, you know, a phrase or the whole sentence, or maybe they understand it all, but they're not able to speak. So that's really the area of research that I'm looking at, Manisha. And Andrea Custer, Clark, and I had started the Cree and Coffee group in January 2021. And that's our Sunday morning. Andrea was with me till the end of June, I think, in 2021. So Joseph Nukshahtowin, knowledge keeper, friend, mentor, has been with me since July 2021. So we do that on a weekly basis. And so you know, hats off to Simon for doing social media on a daily basis, because it's a lot of work to put in, but I also get a lot back because there's interaction with people. And we've witnessed the development of people, of participants who haven't spoken any Cree at all, to being able to introduce themselves in the language. And I said, it's really heartwarming to see individuals feeling safe enough to practice speaking. And then, you know, we do some individual consultations with people as well. And then, like I said, you know, Simon and Andrea are from the same band, so same First Nation. So anything Andrea says, hey, Charlotte, could you be with na? I'm like Simon. When Simon asks me, I'm always like, sure, okay, just give me a minute. I'll pack a bag and I'll be right there. So Andrea got me on the podcasting. So now we're doing podcasting called Peaksquewin app, or peaksquewin.ca. And so there's, you know, a whole bunch of stories in the different languages for Saskatchewan. So Andrea and I are doing the Cree language, and we have different guests, and, you know, we just have so much fun doing the language. It's not work. It's not anything that requires preparation, but you're having so much fun doing it that the time just disappears.
There's just one quick question that I'll get back to for you, Charlotte, but I'll give space to Simon to reflect on his PhD journey or research.
Thank you, Manisha. put my new email there. I know that you've emailed me from L'Orange. I'm no longer at L'Orange, dear Manisha. If you can just go ahead and email anything to creesimonbird@gmail.com. Nothing new, just exploring the role of social media. I'm currently out of the school system, and it sucks. I love schools. I love the education system, but at the same time, I'm just taking a little bit of a different path that hopefully will lead somewhere that I'm expecting.
Okay, I think there is one more hand. Kristen, please go ahead.
White from the unceded territory of the Secwepemc Nation in what's now identified as British Columbia. And I teach in the RAIC Center for Architecture at Athabasca University, and I'm doing work around the role of the land acknowledgement and in strengthening the identity and the presence of land in the practice of architecture. And so I would just love to hear any thoughts you have on that, on what role you feel land acknowledgements have and what value they have in telling. I think they open the door to tell it, for the opportunity to speak a truer narrative of our relationship to the land and our relationship to the people of the land. And so yes, I'd really appreciate hearing from both of you, and Nukshahtowin, thank you for your presentations today.
Is it Sunil and Simon?
Oh, thank you. Nukshahtowin, as one of our cohort members says, people are medicine. The one that speaks the language there in the Kamloops area, North Okanagan. I just wanted to say that in terms of strengthening architecture through language, I think you're absolutely doing the right thing. Asking questions. I ask lots of questions. I think you should never ask or never stop. I think too many people are hesitant to ask questions as to how the teachings or how the language can strengthen something that's seemingly untraditionally connected. I think exploring other Indigenous architects, land acknowledgements, just by, you walk into the University of Saskatchewan, right up there, it's an SRO, Tawao, welcome to the great place of learning or university. Is just a small way. And I think just having maybe a virtual discussion like this with some knowledge keepers, some ways to incorporate the land. I know if you've ever been in Ottawa, hop on one of those double-decker buses and go for a spin around Ottawa, and they'll tell you about the Tulip Festival and how a Scandinavian king and queen had to give birth to a daughter here, and deemed a hospital, the government of Canada deemed a hospital room as international land in order for that baby to retain that ability to have to be royalty, and all these little stories, atop of this road here there you'll see a small maple flag, and then you go to this church, and then there's certain it's all about what Charlotte mentioned, it's all about that developing stories. It might not be right up in your face, Indigenous this or Indigenous that, but maybe the architecture, maybe this room, maybe that color, maybe the position of the door facing this way, or the windows facing, or the plants that have been purposely planted because those are traditional medicines used from people to the land. There's so many possibilities. I just wanted to just mention that.
Wonderful. I want to honor your time, so I'll be mindful of your time and ask last question from the audience. Could you please talk about language development and knowledge keepers outside of the academic system? How is language being nurtured in daily life, not just through academia?
So Scots, thank you for the question. One of the things that we're tasked to do with is to do with community language work. And so community language work is very diverse, depending on what language group it is, what nation you're in, what territory you're in. And it sort of ties into what the question is on architecture and land, because you can't just do it once. It's something that needs to be nurtured. It needs to have voice. And so that's the language work, as well as the land acknowledgement, as well as the architecture. It needs to be nurtured. There needs to be protocol that's done with that. And it really depends on where the nations are, like where the learners are. We can use virtual ways to connect with learners or with teachers, but it's often hard in languages to really have some of the nuances, some of the cadence for the language, the rhythm for the language, all of those pieces. You can't really convey those in a virtual platform. So just I think they're all over the place. I'm involved in a few projects in Saskatchewan as well, and so just based on there's sometimes it's the Friendship Center that's doing it. If it's in an urban center, usually that's the place that is the hub, is the Friendship Center, or the band office will usually also have programming. The K-12 systems on reserve and also in provincial systems have language offerings for the K-12 population, but there aren't any K-12 offerings for adult populations. And so that whole area is just being developed, and it's sporadic. So, the Indigenous Languages Act just was passed. And so there are pieces that are still building together. People are coming together. Somebody has to have the will to say, okay, I'm going to sacrifice a whole lot of time and effort to build the program. Build it and they will come. I think that's the name of a movie, or that's a phrase in a movie. Build a language center and they'll show up. So.
Thank you so much. Simon, would you like to add something to the question? It was the question asked by Theresa Zollner, by the way. Sorry, I forgot to.
Well, I think it's important to note, personally, I think there's a strong correlation of the mindset and attitude of Cree people. And I know I'm biased in saying it, but there's a real sense of adapting and adopting. And, if you take a look at Rocky Boy in the United States, like in Montana, the wide dialect speakers, they don't use standard Roman orthography. A lot of what they write is actually phonetically, much like Anishinaabemowin, where they use the double vowels. That's happening out there. First Nations University, wide dialect, for the most part, SRO, and then TH dialect speakers. It's not a coincidence that Andrea, Charlotte, myself are Northerners. I think in a way we're giving back to our own people, the ones that have been aggressively assimilated. If you take a look at Canada and right along the US border and where the train tracks developed, our relatives to the south had it the worst in terms of being displaced and isolated and aggressively forced to be just abandon their traditional lifestyles. And the language was the first thing to be taken away. And then systematically and eventually the northern people were impacted. Now, I think there's an innate responsibility that I'm going to say is definitely part of me, but I think it's within my fellow Northerners, the way we're trying to give back. And I think the fact that a lot of the written resources that were first developed was almost like a response. We better save the language before it disappears. And we benefited as Northerners, learning SRO, reintroduced to syllabics, and then taking, the apps that are being developed down south. And in a way, it's a lot of it is, not what one person or what one group is doing. It's a lot of, letting people develop and do what they want without having to police it too much, because policing it, I think, dampers that momentum or motivation. And I go back to that Giam kind of way of thinking, it's okay, let it be, it's each to their own. And eventually the road down ahead will find their own way there, because we're all going to see each other at that spot where we're looking for those answers. So I say that with all due respect and with as much consideration to the other Indigenous languages as much as possible. It's just something of my personal observation.
Thank you so much. That was a beautiful way of finishing up this first inaugural talk. There are certainly many thank yous on the side. You can read them, but I would like to just really express my deepest thank you to you, Simon and Charlotte, for sharing your unique journeys and opening up this welcoming space and nudging us to really self-reflect and reconnect with Indigenous language, culture, and land. And this is actually the way how we hope to build alliances and channel synergies towards a better plurilingual world. I was very careful because there is a tongue twister of the next 7 generations. So thank you so much for this. And I wish all of you beautiful rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.